The old house groaned. A chill settled in the air. Midnight approached. It was the hour of shadows, the hour of whispers, the hour when the veil between the living and the dead grew thin. The silence was heavy, thick with anticipation. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of wind in the trees outside sent shivers down the spine. The air itself seemed to crackle with unseen energy. Something was coming. He lay in bed, eyes squeezed shut, trying to ignore the oppressive atmosphere. Sleep, elusive and fitful, danced just out of reach. Then it hit, a shrill, piercing ring that sliced through the darkness. The alarm clock, 12 a.m. He fumbled for the button, his heart pounding in his chest. The sound ceased abruptly, leaving behind a ringing silence that was somehow worse. He was wide awake now, every sense on high alert. He sat up in bed, listening intently. The house was silent again, but the feeling of unease lingered. He had lived in the old Victorian house for months, and it had always been unsettling. But tonight was different. Tonight there was something else. He tried to rationalize the feeling away. An old house settled, wires frayed, it was probably just a short circuit. But deep down a primal fear whispered a different story. A story of things unseen, of secrets buried deep within the walls. He got out of bed and walked over to the alarm clock. It was an old-fashioned wind-up model, a relic from his grandmother. He picked it up, examining it closely. There was nothing out of the ordinary, and yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He set the alarm clock back down, his mind racing. He had never heard it go off before. He had never even wound it. He glanced around the room, his eyes scanning the shadows, searching for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. Echoes of the past. He wandered through the darkened house, his bare feet padding softly on the hardwood floors. He checked every door, every window, but everything was locked, just as he had left it. The house was secure, but the feeling of being watched intensified. He paused at the top of the stairs, his hand resting on the intricately carved banister. The house had belonged to his grandparents, and he had spent many happy summers here as a child. But those memories were tainted now, overshadowed by the growing sense of dread. A glimmer in the darkness. He continued his search, moving from room to room, each one filled with the ghosts of his past. And then he saw it, a faint light emanating from beneath the door of his grandfather's old study. He hadn't been in that room for years. It had been locked up since his grandfather's death, deemed too painful a reminder of the man he had loved and lost. He stared at the light, his heart pounding in his chest. What could possibly be in there? Descent into madness. It was a journey he never thought he would take, a path he never imagined he would walk. The corridor stretched out before him, each step echoing in the silence, each shadow whispering secrets of the past. The air was thick with anticipation, a palpable tension that seemed to cling to his very skin. He could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on him, urging him to turn back, to flee from whatever lay at the end of this dark passage. But he couldn't. He had to know. He had to see for himself. He reached for the doorknob, his hand trembling. The cold metal sent a shiver up his spine, a stark contrast to the warmth of his skin. It was as if the doorknob itself was alive, pulsing with a strange energy, a silent guardian of the secrets that lay beyond. His fingers hesitated, hovering just above the surface, as if they too were afraid of what they might find. He could hear his own heartbeat, a steady drumbeat in the quiet, a reminder of his own humanity in the face of the unknown. It was cold to the touch, as if the metal itself was afraid of what lay beyond. The chill seemed to seep into his bones, a creeping frost that made him shiver. He could feel the weight of the door, heavy and unyielding, a barrier between him and the truth. But he couldn't stop now. He had come too far, sacrificed too much. He had to know what was on the other side. He took a deep breath and turned the knob. The sound of the latch releasing was deafening in the silence, a sharp click that echoed through the corridor. He could feel the door begin to move, a slow, reluctant shift that seemed to resist his every effort. It was as if the door itself was trying to protect him, to keep him from the horrors that lay beyond. But he was determined. He had to see. He had to know. The door creaked open, revealing a scene that sent a chill down his spine. The room beyond was shrouded in darkness, the only light coming from a single, flickering bulb that cast long, eerie shadows across the floor. The air was thick with dust, the smell of decay and neglect heavy in his nostrils. He could feel the weight of the years pressing down on him, the ghosts of the past whispering in his ear. The study was in disarray, books scattered across the floor, furniture overturned. It was as if a storm had passed through, leaving chaos in its wake. Papers fluttered in the breeze from the open door, a silent testament to the madness that had taken hold. He could see the remnants of a life once lived, the echoes of a mind that had been pushed to the brink. It was a scene of utter devastation, a stark reminder of the fragility of sanity. And in the center of the room, bathed in the eerie glow of a single lamp, was the source of the light, his grandfather's old ham radio, its dials glowing an eerie green. It was a relic from another time, a link to a past that seemed both distant and immediate. The radio crackled with static, a faint ghostly whisper that sent a shiver down his spine. He could feel the weight of his grandfather's presence, a silent guardian watching over him. The radio was more than just a piece of machinery. It was a portal to another world, a connection to a mind that had been lost to madness. He reached out, his hand trembling, and touched the dial. The static grew louder, a cacophony of voices that seemed to come from the very depths of his soul. He could feel the madness creeping in, a dark, insidious force that threatened to consume him. But he couldn't turn away. He had to know, he had to understand. And so, with a deep breath, he turned the dial, plunging headfirst into the abyss. The unveiling. It was a moment he had both dreaded and anticipated for years. The room was dimly lit, shadows dancing on the walls as the old radio cast an eerie glow. He stared at the radio, his mind reeling. Memories of his childhood flooded back, days spent in this very room, watching his grandfather communicate with people from distant lands. He had no memory of it ever working. It had always been a relic, a piece of history that never seemed to function. Yet here it was, alive with a mysterious energy. His grandfather had been an avid ham radio enthusiast, spending countless hours tuning frequencies and making connections. The stories he told of voices from across the globe had always fascinated him, but the equipment had been silent for years, gathering dust in this forgotten room. It was as if time had stood still, preserving the memories but silencing the voices. And yet, here it was, glowing with an unnatural light. The soft hum it emitted seemed to beckon him, urging him to uncover its secrets. He took a step closer, drawn by an unseen force. His heart pounded in his chest, a mix of fear and curiosity driving him forward. As he approached the radio, he heard it, a faint crackling sound like static from a distant storm. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a sign of life in the old machine. He reached out and touched the speaker, his fingers trembling. The cold metal sent a shiver down his spine, but he couldn't pull away, and as his fingers made contact, a voice filled the room. It was clear, yet distant, like a whisper carried on the wind. The words were indistinct, but the tone was unmistakable. It was a call, a message from the past reaching out to the present. An unsettled soul, a man tormented by echoes of the past, shadows that refused to fade. His nights were sleepless, haunted by memories that clung to him like a second skin. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind seemed to carry a message from a time long gone. He was a prisoner of his own mind, trapped in a cycle of fear and longing. The weight of his past bore down on him, a constant reminder of things left unsaid, deeds left undone. He wandered through his days in a daze, the world around him a blur of colors and sounds that barely registered. His only solace was the hope that one day he might find peace. The voice was weak, barely audible but unmistakable. It cut through the silence like a knife, sending shivers down his spine. He strained to hear, his heart pounding in his chest. The voice was familiar, yet distant, like a forgotten melody that suddenly resurfaced. It was a voice he had not heard in years, a voice that belonged to a man who had long since passed away. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks, leaving him breathless and disoriented. He closed his eyes, trying to focus, to make sense of what he was hearing. But the voice was elusive, slipping through his grasp, like sand through his fingers. It was his grandfather's voice. The man who had been his mentor, his guide, his rock. The man who had taught him everything he knew, who had been there for him through thick and thin. The man whose loss had left a gaping hole in his heart, a wound that had never fully healed. He could still remember the sound of his grandfather's laughter, the warmth of his embrace, the wisdom in his words. And now, here he was, hearing that voice again, as clear as day, as if his grandfather were standing right next to him. It was both a comfort and a torment, a reminder of what he had lost and what he could never get back. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent, desperate. It was as if his grandfather was trying to tell him something important, something that couldn't wait. He felt a sense of urgency, a need to understand, to decipher the message. He leaned in closer, his ears straining, his mind racing. But the words remained just out of reach, tantalizingly close yet frustratingly distant. He felt a surge of frustration, a burning desire to know, to understand. But no matter how hard he tried, the message remained a mystery, a puzzle he couldn't solve. He stood there, frozen in place, listening to the ghostly transmission, his blood running cold. The room seemed to close in around him, the walls pressing in, the air growing thick and suffocating. He felt a chill run down his spine, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. He wanted to move, to run, to escape, but his legs refused to obey. He was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear and confusion. The voice continued to speak, its tone growing more urgent, more insistent. He felt a sense of dread, a gnawing fear that something terrible was about to happen. The light from the radio flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The room was bathed in a ghostly glow, the light dancing and shifting like a living thing. He watched in horror as the light grew dimmer, the voice growing fainter, and then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was gone. The light went out, the voice fell silent, and the room was plunged into darkness. He was left standing there, alone in the dark, his mind reeling, his heart pounding. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos that had just unfolded. The room was plunged into darkness, the only sound his own ragged breathing. He stood there, his chest heaving, his mind racing. The darkness was oppressive, suffocating, a tangible presence that seemed to wrap around him like a shroud. He felt a sense of panic rising, a desperate need to escape, to find light, to find answers. But he was trapped, caught in the grip of his own fear and confusion. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself, to steady his racing heart. But the fear was too strong, the darkness too deep. He felt like he was drowning, sinking into a black abyss with no way out. He stood there for a long moment, lost in the darkness, the silence broken only by the sound of his own racing heart. Time seemed to stand still, the seconds stretching into eternity. He felt a sense of hopelessness, a crushing weight that threatened to overwhelm him. But then, slowly, he began to gather his thoughts, to piece together the fragments of his shattered mind. He took another deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm, to think clearly. He knew he had to find a way out, to make sense of what had just happened. He couldn't let the fear consume him, couldn't let the darkness win. The midnight alarm had served its purpose, a haunting reminder of a past he could never escape. It was a wake-up call, a stark reminder that the past was never truly gone, that it could come back to haunt him at any moment. He knew he had to confront his demons, to face the ghosts of his past head-on. He couldn't keep running, couldn't keep hiding. The midnight alarm was a call to action, a challenge to find the strength to move forward, to find peace. He took one last deep breath, steeling himself for the journey ahead. The road would be long and difficult, but he was determined to find his way, to finally lay his unsettled soul to rest.